some good news and some crappy news. But the fact that we have good news is really encouraging. I feel like the first domino is starting to fall. For those who don't know what the good news is, it is a report from Sweden saying that they're going to be much more cautious about the use of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, which is super exciting, especially since they sort of were at the forefront of pushing these interventions. And I just want to read what this, just a little excerpt of what this says. It says, these treatments are potentially fraught with extensive and irreversible adverse consequences, such as cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, infertility, increased cancer risk, and thrombosis. This makes it a challenge to assess the risk versus benefits for an individual patient, and even more challenging when those are minors. So I wish it were 21 and not 16, but this is a big start because we have kids, as we know, as young as 8 years old, getting both puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones from Johanna Olsen-Kennedy, and who knows who else. I know Robert Garofalo regularly talks about giving cross-sex hormones to kids as young as 13. So this is good news. They're questioning and they're pointing out that these are some problematic interventions.
Well, and we've known this for a while, haven't we? Because it's very easy to look at the history of these drugs. I mean, we've talked about this before. Lupron was originally given to male prisoners as a chemical castration, and it was determined that it was cruel and unusual punishment because of all the side effects. It was given to women with endometriosis, and there's now a class action lawsuit for all of the damage that's been done to their bodies. In fact, I don't know if you guys know, but we got an email to PEC last week from a woman thanking us for bringing up the fact that Lupron is in the middle of a class action lawsuit with these adult women. So it's not, it didn't take a research scientist, it didn't take a brain surgeon to look at the data and say, this stuff is bad news. Why are we giving it to kids? So bravo, Sweden. Thank you for doing that. Everybody else needs to follow suit.
Yeah, unfortunately, in the US, we have had a number of legislative efforts fail that were trying to do pretty much what Sweden just did. And again, the whole claim of, suicide and life, these are life-preserving interventions without any evidence. And so we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and that really, look, we have to really go back to the facts and the evidence here. So in 1971, these puberty blockers were created based off of one research paper, just one research paper that was peer reviewed, but it was only one, and it was into the negative psychological effects of going through early puberty. So that was the reason. They wanted to give it to these kids, these small fraction of children who, may have been developing breasts at the age of 6 years old, and how that was psychologically a problem, but not physically. So it was never intended for this use. And then in 2007, the Boston Children's Hospital started seeing patients as young as 4. I'm not saying that patients as young as 4 were being put on puberty blockers, but they started to actually receive these patients. And now, 2021, in North America, so that's, Canada and the United States, there's 300 of these gender clinics that will give puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. So this is a massive growth market, as Maria's previously pointed out. And if we tail it all back, this has all come off the back of basically a research paper that was that went out there to prove something entirely different. Wow. So it's really appropriate that we do pull this back, because the burden of care on these children is massive, is huge. They may actually get some type of a benefit, perhaps, but they have about 500 disadvantages. Teeth falling out, crumbling bones. People talk about the bone density, but in the same way, we have no clue. We have no idea about what these drugs do, besides the anecdotal negative side effects that they have.
Well, and I'm in a group for women who have been harmed by Lupron because they took it for endometriosis. And these are grown women, and they have horror stories about being, debilitated and unable to function because of the side effects of Lupron. And like you said, we don't even know what this is going to do to children. One of the things that that I've heard is that it's safe as long as these children only take it for a couple of years, which is usually how it's used for precocious puberty. But we have kids now who are taking it at 8 years old and continuing it into their teenage years. And then we're adding cross-sex hormones. So this is a major medical experiment that hasn't gone through any of the safeguards that typically medical experimentation it has to go through, especially when it involves children. So like you said, we have a lot of work to go to try and protect these children. And unfortunately, I believe it's not until all these children start reporting these horrible side effects and lifetime disability that lawmakers are going to say, oh, wow, maybe we should do something. Maybe we need to prevent this from happening.
Yeah, what you said was interesting about that this has not gone through any kind of the safeguards that need to happen when you're doing an experiment on human beings. You can't even give human beings aspirin, without doing a human studies. You know better than I do about this.
You have to go through an institutional review board and make sure that the subjects are going to be safe and that they are very well aware of the side effects and potential risks. In this case, there's no way we could do that because we don't know of the risks. And interestingly, one of the things that I'm hearing more and more from young women who have gone on testosterone is just this incredible grief over the loss of their singing voice. I've talked to about 4 detransitioners now who actually invested a lot of time and effort into their voice, maybe doing voice training and were in bands, had recorded stuff. And they thought testosterone would just lower their voice, but they would maintain the actual quality of their voice. And that's just not been the case. And they're devastated by this. This is, one of those side effects that nobody ever mentions. And I'm sure there are dozens more.
I think also something that's not reported enough, and something a lot more research has to be done into it, is actually the effect that this does appear to have on normal female sexuality. Testosterone, when you give it to a regular functioning, female, it has absolutely, just mind-blowing side effects. One of the ones I've reported on from interviewing women who previously had they were previously they'd never taken testosterone. They very much understood their sexuality and what they were. And then all of a sudden, when they're on testosterone, they start getting attracted to the smell of males, the smell of men. And I think that also is contributing to the risky sexual behavior that we do see amongst this population. Extremely risky sexual behavior, vastly overrepresented in online pornography, OnlyFans, things like that. Things that I just feel like, well, if she wasn't on testosterone, would she ever actually be considering this? I don't think she would.
Oh, that's such a good point. I actually talked to a grown woman who went through a sexual assault, had a crisis in her life, went to her doctors, and her doctors actually put her on testosterone right away without doing an evaluation. She actually had asked to be put into a behavior unit because she was scared. She was so unstable. And so they put her on testosterone. And she said it was horrible because she went from having a normal sex drive to being just completely like turned on all the time. And like just this, out of control behavior that she was having. If you do that to a woman who theoretically has some skills to deal with it, imagine what that does to a teenager who's never had even a sexuality, let alone having like feelings of just constantly being turned on and wanting to act on it. It's not surprising that we have really dangerous sexual behavior going on.
Yeah, incredibly dangerous as well. I mean, especially when I'm thinking about the long-term effects of the ability of somebody who's 18 or 19 to fully understand the long-term effects of them doing online pornography or OnlyFans, okay? But if you throw in a mind-altering substance like testosterone into the mix, it's no wonder why this population is overrepresented. And I'm really fearful as well about that as a long-term side effect when they're coming to in their 30s and in their 40s, and there's an online diary of
that doesn't go away once you've
it
done
doesn't go away. The
And
internet
that's
is
not a
innate.
side effect anybody's mentioning. Nobody, I haven't seen
Never.
any of the release forms that I've seen. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and again, there could be a whole slew of others that we're just going to start gradually finding out about and triangulating once we start talking to enough detransitioners, or once these kids have been on this combination of having puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones once they start to get older. So this is concerning, and I'm so thankful that Sweden is starting to question it. I just am shocked by the fact that we're not questioning it more here in the US, in Canada, in the UK, in Israel, and other places.
Well, we know why.
Everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
You know, we know why. As soon as you raise a question, as soon as you say, hey, wait a minute, you get piled on. You get piled on not only by the trans activists, but by, you know, people in the culture who somehow think this is nice. We're just being nice to these kids, you know, pumping them full of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. We're just being kind. And what's wrong with you? It's been a sales job.
Well, actually, Maria, I would actually like to just say that that is true. Culturally, we do have this sort of attack going on people like you and I who are being critical, and the cultural attack is bad. But what is much more concerning is the bureaucratic attacks, is the fact that this is a corporate, there is a corporate mentality, a bureaucratic mentality, a bureaucratic capture of this. Which does not allow for it to be openly played out in public. So it's cultures can actually be changed quite readily. You know, we can really change the public perception about something like drink driving, for example, was very acceptable in the 1960s. And nowadays, drink driving, we've really done a massive, public education about it in the culture. But if they would have had, Jim Beam going against all of these drink driving bills, there'd be people out of their heads on vodka, drinking on the highway. So, we're up against a culture and then an institutional capture, basically, and extreme forms of corporate manipulation.
And I'm so glad you brought that up.
Bills.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, Alix, because I know that the Utah legislation was on track, and then bam, the Utah Jazz got involved, and suddenly there was this threat that maybe the All-Star game wouldn't be held here. And that's what's historically been used, is the economic pressure that these activists are able to put on states when they talk about banning these interventions. And unfortunately, states are willing to basically leverage our children's health and well-being for money, which is just heartbreaking. And it means that we as grassroots activists have to challenge this, and we have to be even better than we would have to be if there wasn't this economic pressure going on. And I think you're right that if this wasn't such a big money game, none of this is happening. I really think it's all fueled economics.
Very much so. Very, very much so. And remember, I just want to remind everybody that's watching this, I mean, corporations traditionally do not get behind and sponsor human rights efforts. It's ludicrous for us to think that, we have this, corporate pride and there's a whole industry behind this trans thing. I mean, ludicrous for us to think like, oh, corporations are just going to get behind a human rights campaign. Absolutely not. I mean, it's you don't see Morgan Stanley getting behind, the ending prostitution in Africa or something. It's just ludicrous that
or helping autistic children get more resources.
Yes.
I mean, there are all sorts of things that we could be standing behind, that we could be fighting for. The fact that they're fighting for this, again, it really sheds light on their intentions. So that was kind of our good news, sort of good, bad. But we also wanted to talk about our friend, Gavin Hubbard, who it looks like might be the first man to compete as a woman in the Olympics. And I don't even know how to respond. If I were a female athlete who'd been competing in this in the kind of competition that he's trying to insinuate himself into, and found out that I was going to be competing against him, I would be infuriated. And I just wanted to read this little quote from Reuters, and it says, former Olympic weightlifter Tracy Lambert says females are being told to be quiet when they complain about the fairness of transgender New Zealand athlete Laurel Hubbard competing in women's competitions. What I think is just I mean, all of this is just infuriating. But the fact is that Gavin Hubbard competed as a male until not that long ago. Mediocre athlete as a male, suddenly identifies as a woman and is potentially going to be in the Olympics.
Well, and I remember Linda Blade, when we spoke to Coach Linda Blade from Canada, she explained that these women are not speaking out, not because they're okay with this, but because it will end their careers. These women have trained all of their lives. I have a friend who, she came so close to swimming in the Olympics, and I think it was 1984, 88. And she was one of the last ones cut from the team. And she talked about how devastating that was. She said, that was the focus of my entire life. I gave up everything for that Olympic dream. These women who are going to the Olympics, that's what they've done. They've dedicated their lives since childhood for this. And if they raise their hands and say, hang on, I'm not okay with a man competing, they're done. They're out. They will not.
Your corporate sponsorship is gone. Again, Alix, this goes back to what you were talking about.
I really have an issue as well with the virtue signaling that I saw from Sarah Silverman. She said, she was
talking who she is, because some of
Sarah Silverman is a comedian from the United States. I mean, she's definitely got some good material out there. I don't like it when comedians are political, I have to admit, because then I think that they're not timeless, but whatever, she can make whatever joke she wants. However, she starts going on this kind of weepy diatribe, about, well, trans girls are not going to be able to compete, and trans girls are girls, and what, do you not want to have tall girls? And I'm like,
was she making a joke? Was she trying to make humor?
No, it was this very strange, weepy kind of diatribe.
I saw Caitlyn Jenner saying trans girls should not play girls' sports. Caitlyn, you're a woman, right? A trans girl is a girl. This is so dumb. They are legislating this shit without one single example of how this plays out. This is not concern for girls' sports. It's transphobia, full stop.
About how we're trying, about how people like you and me and Bruce Jenner are trying to keep these supposed, girls, almost like making them a subset of women. Only
they're more valid than actual women, because they're so marginalized. They've had to go through so much, and they're suffering. And there are meanies like us who might say they're actually men.
And it's not even that, when she was kind of talking about it, she was evoking this idea that we were not allowing small children to play together in, five-a-side soccer or something. No, we're talking about competing at the elite level, where girls are a hair away from, making it onto a team, making a scholarship, going to college for free, lifting women out of poverty. Through sport. We're talking about that. We're not talking about playing on the ice hockey team, okay? We're concerned, of course, when it comes to contact sports. Of course, contact sports should definitely be segregated by sex at all levels after puberty. But, we're talking about opportunities, medals to celebrate fantastic women, not, making some kind of compassionate equality campaign for men.
And we're also talking about honesty, because this is a man who competed as a man for the mass majority of his life, and then all of a sudden just decides to come out and is celebrated. And it seems so ludicrous to me that anybody would accept someone who lived their entire life as a man and then suddenly decided that they were a woman, would allow them to compete. Again, as we know, physiologically, this is a biological male who's going to be And besides the fact that it's, again, promulgating this myth that somehow somebody's beliefs and feelings can change their biology, which is, it's horrifyingly scary when we have people denying basic science like that. I mean, if we want to talk about science denial, saying that your feelings can change your biological sex is about as basic as it gets.
Yeah, and I think this is like if you took a horse and signed him up as a whippet and put him in dog races. And we're like, well, it's got 4 legs, it's got 2 ears, it's a dog.
He snorts like a horse.
Yeah. It's not a horse. This horse thinks he's a dog, so he can run in the dog races.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, it isn't any different than that. I mean, it really is concerning. And it just, again, I've never been an athlete, but I can only imagine how devastating this is, and for women to be silent. So we have this double message. First of all, they're erasing women as a category. Second of all, women, you better shut up, because if you don't, you're going to lose out. Boy, that's pretty significant sexism and bullying going on.
When all of this started, when I first started hearing about this and getting involved with this, my first thought was my feminist friends. I've got some really, staunch feminist friends. And I thought, they are not going to put up with this. They're not going to put up with girls and women being treated like this. And I'm like, they're not only putting up with it, they're leading the charge.
Yep.
I'm not all women, of course, not all feminists, but where is the logic? Where is the reason? Where is the appropriate outrage for what's being done to women and girls?
I actually have a little bit of an answer to that. I think that we have some kind of confusion about the erasure of all of our boundaries, and this appeals to the liberal mind and masquerades as like sympathy for all oppressed groups. And the women who fail to recognize that accepting trans into the feminist community is just another variation of women nurturing men and providing them with this like safe haven and giving them all of our best energies. So this is what it's about, and women that see this, I think a mile away, they just see it as just another basically collusion, actually.
Yeah, it's like a new face to the men's rights movement. And what is especially astonishing to me is that the trans activists have made huge headway by saying that they're being erased. That if they're not allowed to go to the bathroom of their choice, they're being erased. That if they're not allowed to compete in the sports of their choice, they're being erased. That if we don't accept them as actual males and females, even if they're not, they're being erased. And yet when we actually are being erased as a category, we are the ones who are called TERFs and haters and bigots and Nazis. And so again, it makes me just think there's some huge corporate infrastructure behind this, because first of all, nobody's trying to erase any, we're saying, we're perfectly happy to acknowledge you as what you are, which is a trans identified person. Okay, we're not saying you are not that. We're saying, that is what you're doing, but we're not going to accept you into our category of woman, because you aren't. And if we start accepting feelings as fact, we're in big trouble. And so again, it's this question of how is it that this whole ideology is pushed so far into our infrastructure that, I was just watching another series of hearings, and they keep talking about changing gender markers on birth certificates. There are no gender markers on any birth certificates. It's the biological sex of the baby at time of birth that's recorded. So again, it's just this obfuscation of reality that is just confounding.
Yeah. And, I think that you mentioned the corporate sponsorship and the reason why. I'll give you another reason why. Autogynophilia. I know that we speak about this a lot, but autogynophilia, and I know that whenever there's a large group, a large body that's pushing this nonsense, this absolute crap, there is very likely an autogynophile involved in that whole kind of procedure and process. And what does autogynephilia give you? It gives you a disproportionate level of narcissism. And that would really explain how we're being affected. And just to give you an example of that everyday autogynephilic narcissism, a man came out last week called Sapir Berman. He is a trans-identified individual who lives locally to me. Great. Who came out as the first supposedly female referee for soccer matches. And, basically said in his interview, shockingly, unbelievable, he said that he, for the first 26 years of his life, he was jealous of women. Yeah. And so I immediately, I've read everything about autogynephilia. I've read everything that's published about it. And immediately my spidey senses just went off. I'm like, he's jealous of women. He's straight. He says himself, I was a very successful woman, a very successful man, blah, 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 blah. And then he appears for his premiere on the stage, on the stage of like refereeing a soccer match with acrylic nails and makeup. And
that makes him a woman, because we all know that that's what makes us women, is fake nails and makeup.
Oh, and it's just, not that, I love them. I love a good manicure. I love nails. I love makeup. But, if you're going to go for a referee for a football match, if a woman was to actually go after that, can you imagine a woman breaking into that?
Or showing up on the first day of a job looking like that. I mean, that's the thing, is that women historically have had to sort of tamp down on that when we're breaking into traditionally male areas. And
we had to present more like men. We've had to wear business suits. We've had to have tidy hair. We've had to try to present more the way men do in order to break into those traditionally masculine fields. So it's ridiculous. It's a total.
And then also, it just makes me so mad, because here's another guy who's all of a sudden being celebrated and told wonderfully, simply because he's decided to appropriate womanhood in a very offensive way.
Yeah, very much so. And, to see this national celebration for autogynephilia, it was just sickening, absolutely sickening. And I really couldn't care less that this referee's decided to cross-dress. I mean, go for it, have fun. You look silly, I don't care. But this national celebration for this absolute narcissistic fetishist, it was stomach churning. We had to be moving away from this pornified culture and this, these stupid ideas that nails and makeup and special gender feelings are what make you a person. Really, for our own sanity, we have to get away from this.
Yeah, it's really just reinforcing regressive stereotypes about what makes somebody a male or a female. And like you said, he wants to wear lipstick and nails, more power to him. But don't call yourself
go for
a woman, because you're not.
Yeah.
When are we going to get tired of this? Like, there's been so much celebration every time a celebrity. I mean, it's now like all these B, C, and D celebrities are like, I'm going to save my career by coming out as transgender. When are we going to be like, enough already? I know.
I almost wonder if I decided to come out as a man who identifies as a woman, if suddenly I would be more beautiful and more valid as a woman than I am now, more authentic and brave than I am just being a regular old woman.
If we said that we were men who identified as women, then transgender rights people could no longer attack us.
Right.
Now we're
and
one
if it's
of them.
based on feelings. No, we can work on that, girls.
Well, something that a guy said to me this week, actually, a guy said to me that the reason that I'm such a transphobe and bigot is because I'm really jealous of these guys and the way that they look that I could never possibly be as beautiful as
Because
them.
that's how we are as women. That's what, like, basically we are as women. And again, this is the thing that drives me crazy about these autogynephiles, is they actually have no idea what it is like to be a woman, and they project these absurdities on us, which is just infuriating. We are not jealous
Ludicrous.
of them because of how they look. We are upset because they're invading and colonizing our spaces.
But that's another abusive behavior. We've talked about abusive behaviors before, and that projection is a classic abusive behavior. I'm not the one who's jealous of you. You're the one who's jealous of me.
Right.
Because they're so narcissistic, they can't see anything outside of themselves. That's how they feel all the time. So therefore, that's what they think you feel all the time.
Well, and one thing that I think is shocking is the director of Equality Utah, which has gotten really into pushing the trans rights here in Utah, said that I was just an old, gray, sad woman. And I thought, wow, you can make fun of how I look, and that's okay. But
It's so shocking.
AGPs, that's not okay. And this is just, again, turning the tide on women, where we're supposed to celebrate how they are. If we were to say, well, they're ugly, we would get lambasted. But it's okay for them to call us old, gray, ugly women.
So, and you can't even really talk about the actual psychology of autogynophilia, right? An autogynophile has a very likelihood that they have, Sheila Jeffries has done tons of work on this, that they have and also Men Trapped in Men's Bodies by Anne Lawrence, who is a trans-identified male. So he actually went along and said that there's many other comorbidities that happen with autogynophilia. One of them is adult baby syndrome, which is where but there's the other one where they want to have their prosthetics removed. And the reason I know that we don't see tons of adult babies around the place like we do with AGPs is just because it's not culturally acceptable.
It will be.
But it will be.
There's an AGP who I follow who actually works at Walmart, and he's pushing a suit because he was told he couldn't have his binky at work. He's he actually is suing. Last I heard was saying he was going to sue Walmart because his binky was part of like his need for comfort or something, part of a disability. So we're going to start seeing adults with binkies. I have no doubt about it. And soon we'll see adults with diapers. I have no doubt about it.
So I think that if anybody's concerned about this, we've had a really lively discussion. But if you are somebody who works in Walmart and you're upset because, you've seen someone who's invading your privacy and space, come to Partners for Ethical Care. We want to hear about it. If you want to know or if you're in Australia and you want to make what happened in Sweden a reality and you have a story to tell us, come to Partners for Ethical Care. If you're concerned, if you're in Utah like Erin, and you're concerned about your child has recently told you they're non-binary, come to Partners for Ethical Care. We don't have the answers to all of everything, but we can definitely put you in touch with resources and give you also strategies. And if you are in that group whose child is identifying as trans, I cannot recommend anything more than Desist, Detrans, and Detox by Maria. It's very practical, very methodical, and and it does critically examine it without getting into the mess of kind of the identities. I think this is the new way to look at this.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that. And you can find out more about Maria's book on our website, and also send us your story. And there's resources there. We also have a chat. So we try to have somebody available to chat with you 24/7. If for some reason we're not there, please leave your email and we'll get back in touch with you, or submit a form. And we really do want to be there to support people. And there are lots of resources out there. We just need to keep fighting this. Eventually we will win. The first domino fell in Sweden, and pretty soon the rest of the dominoes are going to fall too.